Taken our friend the Kodak 360 camera out of the box, I've realized there's a slight flaw in the way it was designed for certain applications. Mostly that it has a standard quarter-inch mount here on the sides, which means that by default on certain tripods it's going to end up facing forward, the lens like this. But what about if you want to put it like this? Some cheap tripods can't do that, and some of them don't do it well. Some of them don't have levels. You're never going to keep it level with the ground. This isn't going to work. So I thought, why don't we make a little bit of an adapter? So what I've done, I've printed a piece here. Got just a little piece of half exposed sticky tape there as a spacer. I didn't get it quite accurate, but it's close enough. And then, as you can see, the tripod lines up just like that. Then we just take our friend, the usual, stick them in there. Not too tight, don't strip anything out. There we go. And what we end up with, something we can mount on the tripod pretty easily, and it'll hold it like this, or also just for fun, I've made this nice little base, which has got a screw, a quarter-inch screw in it. Just twist it like this. There. Straight up and down, just like it needs to be for those kinds of shots. Works pretty well. Now, an interesting technique that I came up with here was, how do you get a brass nut properly into this kind of piece of plastic? So here we are inside the model, inside Tinkercad. I've gone ahead and I've combined multiple shapes together, but we can ungroup them for just a second here just so you can see what this actually is. So it's actually a circle, just a rectangle slash square, and then you've got a cutout circle there, and then the base, you've got a cut out hexagon that's going to hold that quarter-inch brass nut. So essentially, we're just going to group all those together. Alright, that's not the color we want. I know it doesn't have for 3D printing, but we want it to be red. And then obviously we would take that, we download for 3D printing, and we'd grab it as an STL. Once we've got the STL created, we would then take it into our 3D printing program, print it out, and we would then get our model printed. The next better question is how do we hold this in to make sure it's actually going to be a good fit? Now, when you measure this with a pair of calipers, an actual quarter-inch, these, according to this, is almost exactly 11 millimeters, which is exactly what we set our hole to, or it's what we should have our hole set to in the final print. Obviously, there's never going to be perfect tolerances, but what I did is I then took the actual nut, took a little bit of fire, tried the heat gun didn't get hot enough, so just resorted eventually to fire. Took fire and heated this up, just attached it to a screw, pretty much like this, just as a nice stable holder, and just pressed it in until it was all the way level. So now it's pretty darn flat, and it's nice and snug in there. I can't feel any movement at all. There's much more movement of the actual plastic than there is of that brass nut. And that's good and stable, and it'll sit on its own pretty well, although obviously it's a little front heavy, but that's okay, because most of the time it's going to be sitting on this base anyways, so that doesn't matter. But we can screw that into the base. Sits nicely, nice and stable. It's got little rubber feet, and now you can put it wherever you want in order to take it, or you can stick it on top of a tripod. Should be really great for 360 photos. But that's pretty much the gist of of how I found I can embed metal parts. One other thing that does sometimes help is once you've embedded it, I took just a little bit of liquid super glue and dripped it around the edge, and then you can take a little canned air and just give it a little spray, and that'll distribute it around inside there, and then just kind of dab the excess. I took a little bit of, I think it's 150 grit sandpaper to it just to clean up the bottom, which also, you know, shines up that brass just a little bit, as you can see here. But that's pretty much the basic gist of how I made the little mount for this guy. Because Kodak, I don't know what they're thinking. I assume they're thinking we're going to be taking more photos like a sports camera, because it is labeled as an action camera, so it's going to be on its side more, which, you know, you can still do. Just use the regular tripod mount and don't use the adapter piece I built. But my goal here was to use it more for full 360 photos.